Way, hey, hey, way, oh, hey, hey, away, away. Got it. One extra beat for fun. Anyway, we are starting a new segment of Nish Vibes today. And it's very exciting because every time we have a show, they're always exciting people, but today we have somebody very special, somebody who's actually walked a path that I'm familiar with, traveling through North America and living through the times of craziness that happened within the Indigenous world, Indian country they used to call it, going out to places like Alcatraz and Wounded Knee and places where there was always something going on, and it's interesting though when I have conversations with people on Nish Vibes. A lot of times they're younger, and what's exciting about them is the new vision of how they see things. But I always like to talk to people who's kind of been around the earth same time I have, because that part it was such an impressive time in Indigenous history, because before the 70s, Indigenous people were just locked in, such a terrible condition in the urban settings. Couldn't get work. A lot of people were, living in a highly addictive, lifestyle. I'm not saying that it's not happening today, but in those days, if there was nothing else, then really they were cornered into that. And I remember, my family in Detroit had to live downtown because that's the only place that Native people could live. And then we were going through an era of let's fight back, let's build a stronger connection between our nations. And during that time, it was brought out that the American Indian movement was born, and the things that they did gave them a chance to start letting people know in Turtle Island that we exist still today. And then we've seen progress and sometimes setbacks, since that time. So this is always exciting to converse with somebody who's got that experience and works really well, especially now with the work that is happening here at the university, trying to demonstrate more Indigenous knowledge and components to this institution. So we have Jean Becker, who is the AVP, Associate Vice President of, the university. Maybe explain that.
Indigenous Relations.
Indigenous Relations. Wow. You wouldn't even think we'd have those roles a few years ago, and look what's happening today. So welcome, Jean. Thank you for joining us here at Nish Vibes, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you. And as the listeners know, we never have an agenda. It just kind of flows however the conversation will be. And we try to get real controversial. Not really. Our technical person smiling. So you're not supposed to do that. We'll be careful, Amy. Because she edits it too, so we got to be careful. Anyway, thanks, Jean, for coming on board, and please let me know who you are and what you do, and let's have a discussion about that.
Oh, goodness, that's tall order, who I am and what I do. Myeengun, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's always a pleasure to sit with you and talk to you, and I always come away with something new, something exciting, and so I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you, and thanks so much for having me. Who am I? So, it's interesting. I was in a small conference for the last 2 days, and they kind of ended the conference with that conversation. Who are you? And I was sitting there and I'm thinking, I can't even answer that question, It's, who am I? Am I my memories? I'm getting on in years, and I've been a few places, like you mentioned in the beginning, I've been around a bit, and am I my memories? Am I, a mother? I am a mother. I'm a grandmother. I'm a wife. Well, I've been a wife twice. So a lot of experience in that department. But I am Inuk. I was born and raised in central Labrador. I'm a citizen of Nunatsiavut. But I left home when I was quite young, 17 years old, and I traveled to the United States, where I lived for about 8 years before I came to Canada. And I have spent the last 35 years, I guess, in higher education, first as a student and then as worker. So I'm still a worker in the university. And what I'm doing now, I have to say that, so I came to Waterloo in 2020, so not very long ago, just over 4 years. And it has been a whirlwind being here. There really wasn't much happening in the field of Indigenous initiatives at Waterloo up until then. The university had sort of left the Indigenous Student Services with an affiliated college, United. In those days when it started, it was St. Paul's. Today it's called United College. And, they housed and ran the Indigenous Student Services for all these years. Many years, I guess 22 by now. And so I guess the university just didn't expand on that. Like most universities, have created positions like AVP positions, even vice president positions in some institutions. And but in the past 4 years, we've really made, I was just in Myeengun's office and walking through this building. We're in the Faculty of Health building, BMH, and it's amazing. Everywhere I turn, there's something that tells me there are Indigenous people in this place. And just outside of the building, we're in the process of creating an Indigenous outdoor gathering space, which is, a really central location on the campus. So we are working really hard, and it's not just me, there's so many people that so the first thing that we did after I was hired was start hiring Indigenous people. And I don't even know the number. I can't even give you the number right now because I've stopped kind of tracking it, but we're somewhere over 30 people in all areas of the university. So that's been sort of a foundational principle, is establishing Indigenous people throughout the institution, because it's a big institution. I grew up in a village of 600 people, so this is like a massive city for me. And we really felt like we needed to have people spread throughout the institution. This is the work that we're doing to indigenize, decolonize, and reconcile cannot be done in one spot. It can't be done by one person or a small group of people. It needs to be taken up by the entire institution. And that, of course, means also not just Indigenous people. So all of us who are here now, we're all working with teams of people throughout the whole university.
So what would, knowing that before you came here, what would draw you to an institution that hasn't gone that far yet? Like, because you were working at other institutions and probably comfortable, and you've done a lot of work there. And then to take a look at University of Waterloo and saying that we're not that far advanced yet, so there must have been some reason or motivation for you to join a university that hasn't gone that far yet?
Yeah. I was at Wilfrid Laurier for 16 years, and I loved it there. I was, I had so many friends there. I had, and I was very comfortable. I could have sort of, and I was at a point where I was even considering retirement when the opportunity to come here came up. And I really thought about it. And I first said, no, I wouldn't do it. But, it was exciting. The idea of creating something out of nothing is always exciting, right? It's, and I knew that it would take a lot of work. I knew that it meant, entering into a whole new busy life that when at a time in my life when I was kind of thinking about slowing down. But it was attractive for precisely that reason, that it was all new. It was somewhere where I could possibly create something, start something that didn't exist, so.
But I think, like, if you venture into an organization, I think in order to make those kind of changes, it requires, like you said, more people. So our president, who I think was here after you started or around the same time?
He came probably a year and a half to 2 years after I started. Dr. Goel, yeah. Feridun Hamdalapur was our president when I started. And obviously he recognized the need to, move Waterloo forward in terms of indigenization, and the universities across Canada have a commitment to indigenizing, and they have been very active in the last, especially since 2015, since the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission were released. The universities of Canada have been leaders, really, in sort of pushing the universities forward in recognizing the need to address the issues around Indigenous education. And so I was hired while Feridun was still the president, and then when Dr. Goel came on board, he was immediately such a positive ally and supporter, and there wasn't anything that I had to convince him of.
And he came from, I think, Toronto, where he actually got things started there too, from what I understand.
I don't know how involved he was in the starting, but he was certainly well acquainted with my colleagues at U of T. So, the people I knew, he knew. Mm-hmm. He really, he has a really deep understanding of what happened here in Canada and why, for instance, his field of study is health, as you know. And I really think that, anybody in the health field who comes to know what the challenges are in addressing the health issues in Indigenous communities can't help but be impacted, not just professionally, but also personally, by that history, because it's quite a dark and traumatic history, and even more than the history, it's the current reality. It's still dark and gloomy for many of our communities.
That's for sure.
I think that yes, absolutely. I always say when people ask me how do you get the work you're doing done, and how do you get it done so quickly? And I always say it's because I have the support of the senior administration.
Yeah, collaboration, I think goes a long ways. And when we have a chance to develop that with the same personal and professional goals, we have a chance to build that relationship a lot quicker and stronger. So I think since you've came, you there's hired 30 or so people, maybe more, probably more. And there's still a lot of people that don't identify. But I think the same thing with students coming to a place where they know that there's respect for Indigenous culture. I think I learned that from Conestoga College, where we were able to let people know that we've dedicated to various things, not just academic, but personal.
Yes.
When it comes to health of our students, or even naming ceremonies, or whatever it could be. It kind of helps our students feel a little bit more comfort here. When I started here, there was a student in optometry who was walking through the green area where the gathering space is being built today, and felt like there's nothing here for me. I just happened to notice his orange shirt, and that's the reason I picked him out, and I went and talked to him, and he just said, we're the only optometry school in Canada, so he had to come here from Vancouver, and just felt like there was nothing for him. So I think when I hear a student say things like that, that tells us that we really have to get busy in letting them know that they're welcome here. And I think that's what the gathering space did, and that's what your office is doing now, with your staff and the events that you're coordinating. So
Yes. The School of Optometry is interesting because I just had an email from them, and they're working on a admissions pathway for Indigenous students. So I wouldn't be surprised if that student that you're talking about had something to do with this. And so you start with one, and then it spreads, and you can build on that. And I think that's what we've been doing here at Waterloo. We have one person in science, and then it begins to grow, and it begins to grow. And the same for you in the Faculty of Health. You created a space, and you're here, and people are beginning to gravitate towards you, and the building, visible signs that we're here, I think is really important, so that we don't have students having the experience you just described. So yeah, we're doing all those things, getting spaces throughout the institution. The Faculty of Science is scheduled to open a space for their Indigenous students in the fall. And they already have a person in place there to welcome those students when they get there. And we're working at almost everything at once and at the same time. You can't spread yourself too thin, and so it takes time. And I know that particularly for students who are young, and it feels like it's taking too long sometimes. And I'm really sorry that some of our students are having that experience, that they feel like, well, we've been waiting forever, and what I need isn't happening.
I think there's a couple types of approach to do it. Some people are aggressive. They want this thing done real quick and right now. But I think when you plant those seeds, it's just like any plant, it takes a little while to nourish.
Yeah.
And once it gets nourished, it has a better root system. So rather than plunge right into something, just demandingly, I think sometimes it slows the process down, and then that's when you get, people that don't agree with you, and then it takes it longer, right? So
yeah.
I think your approach, I think really stabilizes this for generations to come, which I think is probably the foundational part that's going to be in existence here at the university for a long, long time to come.
I definitely hope that's how that doing it the way we're doing it will will create the really solid foundation and allow for that, flourishment of growth as time goes on. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you grew up in education, like when did you start your personal education career?
Well, I truly feel that, that term lifelong education. Education is lifelong, and it's not all done in a formal setting, in a formal way in an institution. Like my father was one of the most educated people I knew, and he had a 4th grade education, and basically he learned to read and write and do his sums. That's what they used to call it back then.
Sums, yeah.
Doing his sums. But, I guess there were a few things that helped me. I was curious, so I was always sort of wanting to know more. And so I was an avid reader. I have to say, I don't think I was a brilliant student at any particular time, certainly not in grade school or high school. I did better when I came to university, but I didn't do that until I was 38 years old. And this is a very common story for Indigenous people. And it's actually quite common that it's a woman's story, because many of our men never had that opportunity for various reasons to go to university. And in my generation, it was women who were the biggest population of Indigenous students in the universities. So, my kids were just finished high school, sort of getting out on their own when I started school, university. Mm-hmm. And I was given the opportunity. The University of Guelph allowed me to register and they allowed me to take, I think it was 2 courses. They wouldn't let me register as a full-time student because I didn't have the credentials to prove that I could do it, and they were very concerned that I could do it. So they said, okay, you can take these 2 courses. If you can pass those, then we might let you take some more. Eventually, they let me register as a full-time student, and I loved it. It was so much fun. I mean, I was working as a Volkswagen mechanic at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You didn't? Oh. Whole other part of my life.
That's right. Yeah, I'm always learning.
Yeah, so that was actually the problem. Was I was working with my husband in his Volkswagen repair shop, and one day we were on vacation up at Cape Croker, near Shingaming, and I was sitting at a picnic table making a little. I was making a little birch bark basket. I was embroidering a little design on the top of it, and I was thinking, holy, we don't have any pensions, we don't have any savings, we are going to be in trouble when we get old. I better do something about this. How about if I go to university and get a bachelor's degree, and then I'll go to teacher's college and I'll have the summers off. And
yeah.
So that was my plan. My husband agreed to finance this plan. So that's when I went to university. Was when I realized I was needed some pension.
Yeah. Because he didn't have pension there. I guess he had his own business.
That's right. And there was no pension, no savings. We, it was like eating hand-to-mouth kind of existence.
But you know what also is interesting is because you're Inuit, there's not a lot of Inuit people in this region, right? So you came here. Sometimes we need to be around our people, and there wasn't a big population here. So that might have been kind of tough for you to even be in the region, growing up where you did, and and being around the people that, you're from, and coming here and not really seeing too many. Was that a challenge for you, or how'd that work?
Well, part of the reason I ended up in Ontario was because one of my sisters was here. So that helped. And after I came here, some of my other family moved here as well. So, it's kind of like you often hear this story about immigrants to Canada where, one person comes and then they help bring in others, and then they, try to get their parents or, get the whole family with them. So it was kind of working like that, where I had one of my brothers came out and he stayed with us for months while they, got settled and looked for a place and established themselves. And then a cousin came and same thing. We took them in with 4 children and, they lived with us until they got settled and established. So we kind of, I guess, created our own community in a sense as the years went by. And I did go home fairly regularly in those years when my parents were still alive, and I still had a large family. There were 9 children in my family, so we have a large family still at home.
So some of them moved here, and then it just made you more comfortable. Did you have language and all that when you started?
The only language I have is English.
Okay.
And because the part of Labrador that I grew up in was not it wasn't in the Nunatsiavut territory, really, because that's on the coast of Labrador. I grew up in the interior of Labrador. So it was, and the village that I grew up in was the site of what is now known as the Indian Residential School for Labrador. Mm-hmm. So that school was in my village. I attended that school as a day student, but all of the kids from the coast attended it and lived in a dormitory. So they would be brought in late August and start school in September. They would stay all year until a few of them, I think, maybe went home for Christmas, but not very many. Most of them would have stayed for the whole year and only went home at the end of June. They would have July and August in their own communities. So they actually lost their language. Most of them, those people of my generation who went through that school system, lost Inuktitut. They couldn't speak it anymore when they would go home, and that was one of the things that the old people talked about, was the children coming home and they could no longer speak with the grandparents, so they didn't receive the teachings from those grandparents. And Labrador is a very interesting study. If I had it to do over, I would study Labrador and write about it, because it's such a fascinating history. The colonial history of Labrador is unlike anything else in Canada, because it was probably the earliest area to be colonized and the longest. So, BC is unique because they had the shortest colonial history.
Right.
Labrador is unique because it's had the longest colonial history.
Absolutely.
And the extent of the colonization is quite remarkable. Having said that, Inuktitut is still spoken in Labrador. Okay. And they have maintained the language throughout. But, part of the conference I was just at, there was a woman from Nunavut there, and she told me that it's appalling how rapidly they're losing the language in Nunavut itself. So she said the younger generation's just not learning it. Mm-hmm. And, this is, they're like 85% population is Inuk, but they're not learning the language.
Do they contribute that to like the technology and
yeah, and the school
reasons?
system? I mean, about 5 years ago, I think it was, there was a real shocking development happened in Nunavut where they announced that they were dropping Inuktitut in the schools up there.
Wow.
And it is a big controversy still. I think there is some movement to try and keep it in the schools, but it's still not it's not a solid fact that they will continue to teach in Inuktitut.
That story reminds me of, I have friends down in New Orleans who, they've ventured into the French language when it was, New France at the time. And some of the people from the Acadian people end up in New Orleans region. But they've maintained the French, not their native languages.
Yes.
So just recently, they were told that they couldn't have French in their school. So they band together, they fought, and they have a French school. So actually they're fighting for the language that wasn't theirs in particular, but they've grown accustomed to. So I kind of like see this kind of happening across the country, where the languages, they say it's important, but not really. When you look at the school board's dedication to language, it's important, as they say, but there's really no dedication for funding. And I don't really think they see the value in it as we do, because it's just you think we're in a different world with reconciliation as a current slogan that the government lives by, but in reality it's still not where it should be, and I think we need to start building that up in our elementary schools even more. We
absolutely do. And when I was at the university, it was actually at McMaster, I did a beginning Ojibwe course, Anishinaabe Moan. And when I was studying that, it was so fascinating to me how much, so in studying the language, I was also studying the culture, because you can't learn the culture without the language. And it's so tied together, and I don't think people really understand that the two things are so interconnected that if you have the opportunity to study, and I think it's true of any Indigenous language. I know people who've learned Mohawk as adults, and it's fascinating to me how they learn the culture and a way of thinking that is so different from if you only think in English. And, the other day we were looking through some of our paperwork, and I found a certificate from I spent a couple of years on the island of Okinawa, and I studied Japanese, and I found my beginning Japanese certificate. The only word I remember is sayonara, but I think I knew that before I ever went there. But anyway, I have a really poor ear for languages. I'm not good with music or mathematics either, so I know I'll never learn an Indigenous language, but I've studied it enough to understand how important it is. Mm-hmm. When I was reading Basil Johnson years ago, and, I had met Basil and was really interested in the work that he had done, both on culture and language. And I remember when he talked about Wadabawin, mm-hmm. the word for truth. And when he explained, as an Anishinaabe speaker, what that word meant, it was like it opened a whole world for me. Because what he said was, this word actually translates literally to the truth according to his or her perception, which is a philosophical statement meaning there is no one truth.
Very much.
There's many truths, and it's all according to his or her perception. I mean, that's phenomenal. That, to me, like just that one thing changed my life,
In contrast to English and how we learn, it has to be set in this way, right? I think where Indigenous peoples' diversity, in philosophy carries the wealth of so much. But it boils down to something very similar and simple. It's our relationship to our co-creation, our earth and land and water and air, I think. So when I think about language distinction, like even when we try to ask for a translation, you'll get 4 or 5 different translations to it.
Yes, I encounter that all the time, because years ago when I actually, for a brief time, I worked at St. Paul's United College in those days. I worked there. I was the first Aboriginal coordinator over there. And I did that job for 3 years. And I started a drum group, a women's drum group. And I didn't know any songs, and I didn't know how to drum, and I didn't have a drum. But what I believed was that drumming, number one, it could help women find their voices. And I really felt that that was missing in the community here in our region, that women coming together and doing something that was a positive expression of a creative expression together would be really healing. So I found a woman who was a song keeper and had a drum, and I asked her if she would start this group with me, and she agreed, and so she came and we started singing together, and then other people started to join us. But so I learned all these songs, and some of them are like just sounds. They're not words, which is fine, but some of them had words. And so we were singing these words, and I didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know what I was singing, and I started asking people, and I would have some speakers who would say to me, I'll have to think about it. And, it would take maybe a month, and they'd come back and say, oh, this is a translation I've settled on. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then, but another person might translate it quite differently. And so I also learned there are so many dialects. We had 2 elders up at Myeengun who were, they've been married for 60 years or more. And we used to laugh at them because they were always fighting about what that word means. Yeah. They grew up on the same reserve, wow, but on different sides of the reserve. Okay. But they're very fluid and living languages. And I think this is the same for other Indigenous languages too, that they're really, it's not so rigid, Like I'm learning German right now, and when I mispronounce a word, my husband's like, no, this is not like that. You got to say it like whatever.
Right. But that kind of brings me back to what you're saying with Basil. Like, you know, he would know the literal meaning of these things, but it doesn't come through in the same tone all the time. Yeah. So he was one of my teachers too, and he actually tested me every time he seen me, and he would challenge me, and I would get so scared to see him if he was at a powwow because I know he's going to test me, and I don't know if I'm capable. But he was doing that intentionally. He was saying, I'm showing you a different way. Okay, you learned what I have on my tapes and my CDs and whatever, but I said, there's other ways of saying things, so don't get too caught up in the one way. And that resonated with me so clear today. So when I speak, and as much as I can speak, I used to be scared to speak in front of anybody, especially if there's a speaker. And then one day I said, if I don't challenge myself, I'll never be able to do what I want to do. So I say what I can say, and if that person can help me understand better, then I learn. You know, so it's fear, I think, sometimes that keeps us from challenging ourselves.
Yes, and you know, being afraid of being made fun of, and which is a kind of habit amongst our people, making fun of each other.
Well, I had to be careful because I did a show in Windsor one time, and it was a radio show, my first show, and we had a fluent speaker from Wiki, and he would come on, and I would just love hearing his language, but I knew he said something kind of bad. He would give me that little look, and I said, you said something you probably shouldn't have said, and he would say, yeah, you're right. So humor and laughter, you know, is a big part of our language and, you know, being as Indigenous people. So, you know, he would give me that gleam in his eye. I said, I'm glad nobody can translate that because I'd probably get kicked off the air. And then you get into a sweat lodge with, I used to go with different elders, and they would speak the language so fast and fluent. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I'm just picking out words as fast as they're going, you know, and you kind of can train yourself a little bit too, like, because there's different dialects, and, you know, well, just for Ojibwe, there's regions, Minnesota, all the way across here. But a lot of times the root word is very clear, and you can kind of dig in and listen to the root word, and you can kind of keep up with what they're saying.
Yes, yes. I remember Basil telling a story about going out west somewhere, speaking and using a word that he thought meant pants.
Yeah,
and
make note.
You know the story.
It'd be something different out there.
Yes, something quite rude.
Yeah. But I think that's what got us through the hardship of residential school, and you know, there's laughter that always comes with Indigenous gatherings. No matter how serious the situation is, a funeral, you're sitting there.
That's the funniest time, the funniest event to go to.
Sometimes it is, yeah. I went to one in Six Nations yesterday for an old friend from Detroit, and that's exactly what happened. They brought the guitar out. The guy says, I don't know how to play, but I'm going to play anyway. And people just started laughing, and the guy asks, is there lunch after this? And the guy says, somebody from the back, are you hungry or something? You know? It was at the funeral, you know. People but it's good. So we're about 7 minutes left to go in our interview. It went by so quick already. And I think, you know, I always wanted to get music played, but, you know, like, we're working on that, trying to get some good songs here. So is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience in our time that we have left?
Goodness. Now you're really making me think. So much to say and so little time to say it in. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I want to go back to the first question. Who am I?
Sure.
So yesterday when I was in that conference and everybody was going around, and I was listening to all the ways that different people answered the question, because they did. Every single person had a very different approach to who am I? And I'm sitting there thinking and thinking, and what kept coming up for me were images of home, images of the land, the water, the ice, the snow, the sunlight, glistening on the ice and the snow or on the water, and the memory of the smell of home. Because I always believe, and I don't know if I'm just making this up, but I believe when I fly into home, get off of the airplane, there's this beautiful, sweet smell immediately. It's the smell of the ground and the moss and the, it's just the smell of the land. And I feel like, and I suppose part of it was throughout the conference, because it was a group of Indigenous people from community who were there, and throughout the whole 2 days, there was always talk of the land. And by the time it came to the end of the thing, this was sort of just so much part of who I felt like, that's me. That's, the land is who I am. And I think that's the thing that I treasure most about the time that I've had the opportunity to participate in studying about Indigenous, and I did part of that through the university. I did it with elders. I did it in many, many gatherings and, travels and whatnot. And I feel like all of the work that I've done, including the work I'm doing here at Waterloo, has really brought me back to who I really am. Is I'm part of the land. And I'm part of that land that I was born and grew up in. But, wherever I go in the world, I'm on the land. And I remember being in Germany and trying to relate to, and I was still on the land. Still, this is the Mother Earth. She's everywhere.
Yes.
And we're all on her, and we're all part of her, and we all come from her. And I think that really, it's not even like I understand something in my mind. It's part of me. It's part of my heart now, my whole being, that I am this tiny, tiny, tiny little part of this beautiful thing. And, you're here for such a short time.
Yes.
Now I'm very aware of how short the time is.
Yeah, when you get past your 60s, yeah. Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Wow, that went by quick.
So quick, yeah.
But, the appreciation for having had this opportunity to live this life is so profound. And the more time I spend learning about different Indigenous people and hearing stories from all over the world from different Indigenous people, and hearing the same stories with different words or, different characters, but it's kind of the same story. I just feel really privileged to have had the life I've had, and
I think those
here.
Reminders are always in our path somewhere. Lately, I've been looking at our astrology, Indigenous astrology,
yes.
And I'm just so asphyxiated on that right now, because all the things I've learned in life plays a role in that somewhere. The pictographs that are, on the rock paintings tells us the story of Mishibuju and all these other celestial beings. And how does that relate to me? And I think when you get to a certain age, it has so much more meaning. Yeah. I liked it when I was younger, but now I'm just like totally into this, and I understand it better.
Yes, yes, and that's an area that I would love to have time to really study is the stars, but from an Indigenous perspective, and I know that there are people who are doing lots of work in that area, and I'd really like to. Maybe you can give me some tips.
Let's do that, because we've been taught about the Greek mythology and things like that, and they're great, but we have our own philosophies on those star shapes and things like that too.
Yeah.
If you've only learned that system, you've missed out on a whole different range of what those stars mean and how we reflected those stars into our art, into our being.
Yes.
So it's so important that we do that.
And where I grew up, one of the memories I have is of being able to look up in the night sky, and it's a complete carpet. There's not a space where there isn't a star. If the sky is dark enough, it's unbelievable. It's been many years since I've seen it, but even at home now there's too much light, but it is just unbelievable what that looks like and how immense it is.
Well, they say that Milky Way is that doorway or that river to Creator, right?
Yes.
And all those stars that line it, help you see that pathway. And I don't know, when I think about this stuff now, it just makes me smile, because I feel like I've accomplished something by having the energy to learn it.
Yes.
And that's what's going on in my world right now. So I really enjoy that. So anyway, our conversation was awesome. It was way too short, but at least we got a chance to get to know Jean a lot better. And I hope that we see this vision, grow with our recommitment ceremonies coming up, our events that are coming up. Will remind us all, about the journey we're taking here at the University of Waterloo. And I think the future of this university is strong, and I think the commitment that they've made is very strong. So I want to say Myeengun in my language for you to join us on Nish Vibes today.
Nakumek.
And I want to thank our technician, Amy, for putting this all together and making this work for us. So everybody, we will get music going at some point. That's my goal. You're going to hear Come and Get Your Love every week when I get that going. And some other songs. And so we have local artists here, even working at the university. We have Gladwin, who's a great musician, and I can't wait to get some of his music played for you. And I got some sweetgrass and I got some tobacco for you, Jean.
My good.
That's what you have for your participation today. And we'll close off the show by saying Myeengun, everybody, for your time and energy and commitment to learning as we do here at the University of Waterloo. Nish Vibes is just an open concept show that gives us a chance to chat and have a good conversation. So until we meet again, we'll see you at our next Nish Vibes show. Myeengun, everybody. Bama Pi Minwa.